Welcome to the Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of nonbeliever who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have, so be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you. Hey, Pops.
Hey, Moms. Welcome back.
I know. I feel like even though this is just a week later than we usually record, I feel very out of practice.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe you need more weird parenting moments.
I don't know. I somehow don't think that's true. But I did remember there's something I've been wanting to say for the last couple of weeks. So we started running a little announcement on one of my favorite podcasts, For Crying Out Loud. And we got a lot of listeners from that. So
Woohoo!
I meant to say it weeks earlier, but if you're...
Thank you, FCOL.
Yeah, if you're an FCOL person, thank you. It's wonderful to have you here.
Yep.
So we just finished our final trip of the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very nice.
It was.
And it did not make me lose all the sleep, which was very appreciated.
Oh, in fact, quite the opposite.
Yes. We slept past 8 a couple days, which is just...
It's science fiction.
It's science fiction. It's unheard of. It was amazing. But there was one little story I wanted to tell from it, because it made me think about something. So, Reader and Go are really great at going out to adult restaurants. They are willing to try a lot of different things. They like foods that a lot of kids their age probably wouldn't be into. And so that is just one of the parts of traveling with them that's like really fun. But this trip, we had something happen where kind of by accident on 2 different nights, Go ended up getting something that was like spicier than we had intended for him. And it made me think, because on the first night, he totally just rolled with it. And on the second night, something happened that I wouldn't say it's triggering for me, but it's definitely one of the harder moments. Like I can just, with both kids, these things happen where I can just see them shutting down. So he had gotten something that he thought he was really going to like. Octopus.
Mm-hmm.
And it came much spicier than he expected. And then he was just like done. I could just see it in his face because Reader hadn't finished his appetizer and I knew it was something that Go would like as well.
Right.
So we gave that to Go and Go was he was just done.
Mm-hmm.
Like his brain was done. He was unhappy that the thing he got hadn't been what he wanted.
Yeah.
And he just wasn't going to like anything. Mm-hmm. And it's hard because like it can be a little bit challenging to get him out of that mindset.
Yeah.
Once he's in it.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly so at a restaurant where I knew we had more food coming and like the whole rest of the evening to get through. And you were really great with the kids in those moments. And sometimes it's sort of easy to find something to help. And we were with your folks and like your dad in particular was really great at kind of making the boys laugh. And
yes.
But Go was still in a little bit of like a
surly.
He was still surly. Though
Go can get surly.
He can, but do not tell him that because
oh no. Don't talk about his belly button freckle. Don't talk about how he can get surly.
No. But I sort of thought about it. And so we were in like a beach town. And so I felt like the wait staff that we had was very like, I'm working here for the summer and I don't really know what I'm doing kind of vibe. Because the dish had been described as somewhat spicy. And I asked if there was anything they could do to make it less spicy. And the waiter had said, well, it's just like it's pre-prepared, so there's nothing we can do.
Yes, they could have not applied the sauce.
Yes, and that was the frustrating thing because we got it and like clearly like all the stuff it
the
came
sauce
with
was the spicy bit, and they could have not put it on.
And the sauce was just squirted on the top, so it was clearly a waiter who didn't give a shit.
Not squirted, it's drizzled.
Who like didn't really understand the dish and just like didn't care to help. Young guy, I get it, like doesn't have kids, not really seeing the situation, right?
Right.
And so Go was still in his surly state. And I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to see. And so I whispered to him and I said, Go, I'm really frustrated too. Cause like clearly this waiter doesn't really know his stuff, doesn't know the dish, and they could have made it better for you. And I'm frustrated that they didn't. And like that did it. After that, he felt a lot better. And I only bring it up because I feel like it was just a moment where trusting that he could kind of like hear the adult side of the story and get it and that helped, you know?
No,
and I was like,
we're not, moment.
And I was like, we're not going to say anything to the waiter. No. We're not going to complain. This is a summer gig. This is a young guy. But like, I'm frustrated and I'm sorry they didn't help you out. And yeah, and then he was like, oh, okay. And then the surliness was done. And it was a moment of like, yeah, we can trust kids sometimes to.
Well, they like being heard.
Yeah.
Not just like they say a thing and we're present and we look at them and we nod and we say, I hear you. But sometimes to feel like you've been heard requires that the other person meet you there, not just receive the information you're giving, but they meet you where you are. And you met him where he was. It was a great parenting moment. I didn't bring it up at the time because I didn't want him to feel self-conscious, but I was really proud of both of you. Yeah.
So it was a cool little moment.
It was a great moment. And it's a wonderful restaurant.
It is.
I would plug it, but I don't, in deference to our anonymity.
Yeah. Well, we'll skip it. But yeah, otherwise it was
maybe in the future.
Yeah, exactly. When it's not a story complaining about with their waitstaff.
Yeah.
Anyway. So we have a new segment. And I think we're going to call this segment You're Culting All Wrong. And
I already like the cut of this segment's jib.
And it's a little bit like, I don't think everything we're going to talk about is a cult, but, it's the vibe. So
it's a catchy title.
Totally. So Seth Andrews is a wonderful podcast host in the atheist space. If you don't listen to him, he is 100% worth checking out. Great speaker, talks about lots of fun topics. I follow him on Instagram, and he posts all of these questions. And one of the ones he posted was about what you do when religious people come to the door to try to convert you. And unsurprising for a atheist podcast host, most of his followers were like, I don't answer the door. I have funny signs on my door telling those people to go away, et cetera, et cetera. And I have to admit that I am actually sad that we get no Mormon missionaries at our door. Because I actually spent a year meeting with Mormon missionaries. And though I think the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, though I think they now like to be called something else, but I can't remember what that is. I think it's like a super damaging religion that does all sorts of weird shit. But I had a really positive experience meeting with Mormon missionaries. I think they're cool kids. I get along with Mormon people really well. They over-index in my friend group in like a really scary way. And thinking about that time, made me think about something that I am curious about. And I am wondering what your perspective is, actually having grown up in religion, and if you saw anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say there have been about 2 times in my life where I have reached out to a religious community. So one of my best friends in college was Mormon, and after our freshman year went on his mission. So he was gone for 2 years. And I wrote him a ton, and he wrote letters to his whole family friend group. And towards the end of his mission, I felt like there was just no way for me to really understand what he had been through. So the summer he came back, I was staying in New York, and I just walked into one of the local Mormon, I forget what they called, I want to say precincts. That is definitely not the right word. But whatever. One of the local
outposts.
Yes, Mormon outposts. And was like, hey, I want to meet with missionaries. And I'm going to tell you, if you are ever feeling down on yourself, it is real clear if you do that they do not get a lot of people walking through the door because they are so excited. If you need a little ego boost, give it a try because they make you feel real important real fast. But I met with 2 missionaries that whole summer. And if you are a young woman, they do not put you with male missionaries because they clearly think that is a bad combination. So I met with 2 young women missionaries. And then when I went back to school, I kept speaking with missionaries for most of that school year, which did not go as well because they deeply misunderstood who I was as a human being. So, and I also, not as consistently, I don't think I attended services when I was in New York, but when I went back to school, I also attended some of the Mormon services. So that was one time I reached out. And then the other time I think I spoke about on the podcast, which was much more recently, because we moved to this new place and I had half of my family is Jewish. I grew up and I have always lived in areas with very large Jewish populations. And our current home is in a place with very few Jewish people. And I didn't realize
Negative Jews,
yeah. And I did not realize sort of culturally how much that mattered to me. Mm-hmm. And so in the nearest city to us, there are a couple of synagogues, and I reached out to one and I did online services with the kids for a couple of the holidays at one. Mm-hmm. And Jews are not Mormons are known for trying to convert people, and Jews very much not so, but also we are in this area without many. And it's very clear from all the emails that I get from the synagogue that they have an aging population. So one would think that they would sort of want to boost membership at the temple. And in both cases, so I was going to these Mormon services, and then I was on these online Jewish services. And the online, I was not anonymous on the online services. There were 6 families on these calls, right? And I was one of them. So it was very clear that I was a new person. You know what I mean? There was no missing me. It's not there were 100 people and I happened to be a new person. There were 6 people and I happened to be a new person. And in neither instance did anybody reach out to me.
Yeah, so, I'm still blown away by all that.
And one of the things that kind of like turned me off the Mormon services is I went and people came up and they're like, hey, it's so great to meet you. It's so great you're here. And then I wouldn't go for 2 weeks and I'd come back and people would be like, hey, it's so great to meet you. It's so great you're here. And I'm like, I was here and you just don't remember me.
Yeah.
But like no families reached out to be like, oh, you should come to dinner. And like, no one from the temple reached out and was like, hey, you should come to services in person. Who are you? Like, where do you live? There was just nothing. And I feel like in both circumstances, there were like really, you would think, good reasons to do that. Like, I don't think I ever would have become a Mormon. There's just too much just like blatantly awful about them. But I mean, who knows? Like, I did have a really hard senior year and was like, in a delicate place. So I don't know if I had been like surrounded by love, if that would have broken my brain. And like, I will tell you straight out, if anybody had reached out to me from the synagogue, like we might be members of the synagogue right now. You might not.
You might be a member of a synagogue. I'm not converting to Judaism.
You wouldn't have to convert. We could become members without you converting.
That's because that's not weird.
No, not at all. I would have been totally honest. I would have been like, I am an atheist, but I'm also a Jew and I am lonely. Can I come to services?
And so what I would raise my hand sheepishly and say, yeah, I'm Jew Jason.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I just find that fascinating. And like coming from a church that I feel like is not, like the Lutherans aren't super converty.
Well, some are.
Some are. But like, did you see that? Like,
it depends on how like evangelical you get.
Yeah.
Because there are different brands of Lutheranism.
But do you think it would have been different in the church community that you grew up with? Like, have you ever seen anything like that? I'm just wondering.
Like what in particular? Like having people come in and not get reached out to?
Yeah.
Like if you're talking about that, no, like people would come in and the church would have regular events, and at least from what I remember as a kid, we're talking like over a quarter century removed now, but there would be regular events and, people would be invited in and they'd be included to whatever sort of like theater productions or whatever, because there was an active Sunday school. And so some families would come in for that and stay for the other thing. But, is a small church in a reasonably small town. And, when people would come in and they were new, from what I remember, most people that would come in new at that point in history would stick around.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like having grown up in the church, I didn't have any direct experience of what that process would be like. So I just had the experience of seeing new families come in and see them stay. So I'd never really talked to them about their experience in that process of joining. All I know is the end result was, I had a bunch of new teenage church friends over the course of time.
So in the neighborhood that we used to live in, it was very Jewish. And a lot of people assumed that you were Jewish because you kind of look Jewish and
I can talk Jewish.
You can talk Jewish.
That is not intended to be like racist at all. It's just, having a lot of Jewish students and being in a Jewish place and paying attention to them lets me know like the differences between Sukkot and Shavuot, and know about Haman and what are you wearing for Purim, and like I can have like casual conversations about Jewish culture, both secular and religious, and at least somewhat know what I'm talking about. So at a passing glance, I guess I could have passed for Jewish.
It was very funny.
But I never actively like tried. There was no like stolen valor involved,
No.
just to be clear. Like I wasn't trying to look Jewish, but not actually being Jewish. Just throwing that out there.
It was funny though, because you always knew when the Jewish holidays were, and I never had any clue. And you would be like, "Happy Rosh Hashanah."
Like back then, I knew about Jewish holidays that you put a gun to your head, you would have no idea what I was talking about.
Very true. And I was like, oh, interesting.
Let's celebrate the birthday of the Torah. And you're like, what's the Torah?
I'm not that bad, but I do have no idea what that holiday is. But I'm curious, like, since a lot of people assumed you were Jewish, did people ever invite you to their synagogue or anything like that?
I got invited to bar and bat mitzvahs. I got invited to seders. I got invited to Passover stuff. I got invited to all sorts. I turned it all down because, I didn't want to cross that personal professional line, but it was nice to be, invited, let's just say.
Yeah. Okay. So there's like somebody doing this right, at least.
Well, the other thing is, there is a rich tradition in Jewish culture of accepting in a lot of denominations. I would say in most of the denominations, of accepting that at least part of your congregation is going to be secular, and that they're a part of the synagogue or the temple because of the Jewish heritage and not specifically because of the religious trappings and the beliefs. So
I would think so.
I would argue that there is a greater likelihood of secular folks attached to some form of orbit of a temple or synagogue than there would be of a church.
Oh,
right. Or a Mormon temple.
Yeah. So much.
Side note. Here where we live now might not be very Jewish. Where we lived before, we did get some Mormon missionaries. Here, I have gotten plenty of, especially Catholics, coming to try to get us to come to their church.
Really? Like friends of the
Yes.
kids or like random folks?
No. Knocking on doors.
Really?
Yes.
Huh. I had no idea.
I'm sorry that you've missed all of those experiences. They were very brief. It was mostly just me saying, smiling, nodding. Yeah, thanks. I'll think about it. And I'll just close the door because I didn't want to even talk about it. Like they're well-meaning and they're trying to boost church revenues. I get it.
I kind of like Catholics too. Catholics and Jews are very similar.
Yeah.
Culturally, I feel like. There's a lot of guilt. There are a lot of over-involved mothers.
Oh, gosh, the mother thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
It's,
children that can do no wrong. Yeah.
Jews and Italians who tend to be Catholics. We all sort of like, we have weird overlaps. A lot of talking,
Everybody loves the funny hats.
Do Catholics have funny hats?
Well, I mean, Pope.
Ah, yeah.
Bishops. They look like, the whole like, hey, look, I have a pastry on my head.
Unsurprisingly, the Catholics reserve them for the higher-ups.
Yes. I mean, I think that the Catholic, like for the higher-ups, the Catholics have better shoes.
It is hard to beat Pope shoes.
Pope shoes. I mean, for starters, my man lives in like the hotbed of footwear.
This is true.
Let's be honest. For men seeking high-end footwear, he is kind of in Mecca, to cross metaphors here. But
yeah. So just a note, or maybe don't listen to us because we don't want more people to be converted. But, get your cult thing together, people. Put a little effort in.
Yeah, there's less, I think, of a concern. I should say, I have less of a concern, I think, with the seeking out for solace or community from a religious group, especially if you live in a part of the world where that's just the population. Like if you're in the middle of a very rural area, then it's very likely that the church is going to be the main meeting place. It's going to be the center of the community. And as a secular person, if you can go to the church leaders and be really forthright about it and be like, I want my kids to have to be a part of the community. I want to help out the community, all this sort of stuff. Like, I'm not interested in converting to your religion, but I do see you as being sort of like an engine of community events, and I want to help participate in that. And so, go hat in hand, be really humble. If they don't respond to that, then they are culting wrong.
Yeah.
Because they should be like the Mormons, like opening their doors, or like the Jewish families that I used to service, opening their doors and not caring so much about where you are now with your beliefs. More is like, are you a cool person that we want to have in our community in some capacity? And so in that regard, yes, there is culting done right and there is culting done wrong. And I think the purity tests ultimately are culting done wrong from a social standpoint, even though from a theological standpoint, it is probably culting done right.
Indeed. Let's get back to masculinity.
So moving on.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hit that masculinity nail.
In the last episode, we started a conversation about masculinity based on an article by Christine Emba, and in it, she talks about how a lot of men don't really feel like they know what good masculinity looks like anymore. And in the last episode, we talked about some examples that we could think of masculinity. But a question came up that I thought would be a good place to start. And at the end of that conversation, you brought up that all of the characteristics that we were using to describe masculinity could really be applied to men or women or non-binary folks, and how to think about that. And I have been thinking about that question since we recorded. And so I am going to posit that in thinking about new models of masculinity, I don't think characteristics do have to be unique. I think they can all be shared. And I think it might actually be something other than unique characteristics that are important.
Facial hair. I mean, Ben Shapiro has a beard now, so I guess he's more masculine.
Does he?
But then again, he lit some Barbies on fire, so I'm not entirely convinced.
So, because I was thinking about it, and I have a couple other quotes from the article. And
Lay 'em on me.
One that sort of made me think about this is it's talking about masculinity. I don't know if this is a quote from the article at all, but it was the thought I had reading.
Here are some words that may or may not be appropriate for this conversation.
These are words that came out of my head.
Words.
Reading the article. But the article definitely talks about how, sort of part of the old masculinity was that it was very policed. Men were made fun of if they didn't fit those stereotypes. Boys were raised not to show their emotions. There was a lot of in-group policing, which was very hard for men that did not fit those stereotypes, but that did give sort of a very clear set of characteristics where even though there were like negative aspects of having that be like so dogmatically applied, there were like set rules that everybody knew they were living up to. Being good at sports, being strong, not showing emotion, like these were all things that were emphasized. And I think I want to be careful here because I feel like femininity was also highly policed and is still highly policed. Like we talk about the kind of clothes that female politicians wear when that is like never a conversation with men. Women, see wage increases based on their body size and what kind of clothes they wear and how much makeup they wear. So femininity is highly policed as well. But I think there is a little bit of a difference. And I don't know if I've quite put my finger on it. But I think women, much earlier than men, came to the conclusion that some of that policing was not serving them. You know, we saw that we weren't being treated fairly in the workforce. We saw the way, you know, women who weren't working, like when they got divorced, like they had nothing to fall back on, right? And that gave men outsized power. We saw that when we didn't have agency, that put us at greater risk for violence.
Mm-hmm.
So I think women, and I want to be careful here because I think all the stereotypes about men hurt men too. But I think there wasn't as early a recognition of that hurt because some of it wasn't as quantifiable as the negative aspects that women experienced.
Mm.
So, you know, men being depressed and, you know, having like really serious psychological problems from not being able to talk about their emotions, like that is a harder thing to quantify than like,
mm-hmm.
I am getting paid 75 cents on the dollar and
black eyes and wage differences.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So I think earlier women had to get creative. Like femininity was policed, but in some sense, I feel like most women do a dance where they pick and choose and kind of have to figure out what aspects of that they want to play into and which they don't. And there is, you know, I mean, I think you can see this in like tomboys were accepted much more than feminine men earlier on.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, like there, you could be a sporty girl. You could be a, you know, arty girl. There were just, women had to play this game of creativity earlier than men. Because if they didn't, it was just going to like hurt them in really clear ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is not maybe so much about determining these characteristics that are masculine, but I wonder if it's about carving out a new space where what is strong is like finding what makes you, you, whatever it is, without the policing.
I think that's where we're going as a society. Like, and that's what I was alluding to last time, is that when you boil down what makes a masculine man masculine, or what makes a feminine woman feminine, they're not wholly gendered qualities. Like if you talk about women being delicate or having a delicate sensibility, you know, I'd fall back on the samurai who would kill people with their bare hands on one side of their life, but on the other side of their life, they were some of the most renowned poets and flower arrangers in their society.
Mm-hmm.
Like they would practice calligraphy with the same deftness and care and precision that they would swordsmanship and budo, just in general. Killing somebody with a spear is the same as clipping a flower. You know, that it was about perfection. And so then you boil that down and you say, okay, so whatever the action you're expressing is, the goal is to approach perfection, knowing that you'll never achieve it. And that through that repetition, that the daily grind and the minute improvements over time, you'll approach mastery, though you'll never attain perfection, like that logarithmic scale, you know? And I think that when it comes down to utility, because that's, again, utilitarianism, I'll ring that bell again here, that what is the use of a specific, you know, supposed gender characteristic? What is the use to the person? And then how does that extend to a usefulness to society? Right? Like, is there a usefulness to making women weaker such that they earn less. And so in families that rely on a woman's income, those families are necessarily harmed. What if one of those children would be the next great artist or inventor or doctor or astronomer, but they then don't have the opportunities that a little bit more income might have afforded them, and then society loses out because that woman was not afforded a wage commensurate with her expertise, work ethic, experience that a man would just get because of his maleness, right? Or, what's swinging between his legs. Or even like, and then now we're in a place where it could be, what's swinging between her legs. Because ultimately, what is between your legs is far less important now than how you present yourself is. Mm-hmm. Right? And so when you boil down what those presentations are, they're just a mind seeking to fit their self-perception into some sort of construct that society has built up. And then once you sort of pull back to that macro level, it all just becomes arbitrary. And then you start to say, okay, again, what's the usefulness of that construct, of those constructs? Like, how do those constructs help to inform what society should and shouldn't do? And then if you start to bring it back to a humanistic side of like promoting well-being and, balancing the growth of human civilization with the health of the planet, what are we even talking about? Like, who cares? What matters more is the quality of the person, not what their presentation is. And so many societies over time have had, more than two genders. Mm-hmm. And did fine. Greece, hello, Rome, like vast civilizations with whom we credit so many advancements in philosophy and science and art, like in warfare, this thing that was so masculine. Like, presentation is presentation. Like, today, a guy wears, fingernail polish. It's this thing, but I think it was the Babylonians where their army used colored nails to differentiate between, rank. I think it was used as rank designation. I'm gonna check that, but I know that one ancient Near East culture used nail polish on men in that regard, in something like that. So, like, what is the use to any of it? Like, I fail to see, and maybe it's my privilege, but I fail to see how, how these constructs, how they fit into society now, and if you are a trans man, living your truth, and you find that your current presentation is who you need to be, how you need to present yourself, both in the mirror and to the world, so that you can be happy. That's great. You should be able to do that, and there should be no ramifications from that other than your mental health, right? Not being shitty. Like, it, but whatever you choose that masculinity to be, whatever your personal read on what quote unquote masculinity is, then that's what it is. And I think the broadening of what the broadening of what masculinity is just means that ultimately, those circles of masculine and feminine are going to get big enough where their overlap in that sort of Venn diagram sense is going to be just so big that the elements that are excluded from the circle are going to be absolute outliers. And I don't even know what those elements would be. like we said last week, and I've been thinking about it too since, that I cannot think of anything at this point, given what we understand about gender being totally different to biological sex. They are not the same thing. That, like, what those differentiators would be. I mean, I seriously fail. My mind draws a blank.
It was interesting.
I cannot figure it out.
Because thank God I'm an atheist just talked about this too. And Dan told the story. There was like some surfer online, and in some of his videos he posted, he was wearing nail polish.
Yeah. And
some guy reached out and was like, well, why do you wear nail polish? And he replied, oh, don't you know? You can do whatever you want.
That's like, such the perfect response.
It was so great. And what Dan was saying is like, what is the more confident masculine response? Is
exactly.
It the guy
I was like, talking to Reader about this yesterday.
Yeah.
Exact same thing. Like, being cool is not giving a F. Yeah. Right? Like, what do we think of? We think of like the cool characters. And the cool characters march to the beat of their own drums. They don't look for validation from some group. They say what they say, and they stand by it. And if somebody doesn't agree with them, they don't then go out of their way to try to convince the person to agree with it. I would say that urge is a sign of weakness. And if you're looking for what is masculine, I think, like, you know, the Fonz. But the Fonz was a delicate soul too, right? Mm-hmm. He kicked the jukebox, but he was the shoulder you could cry on. You know, like the cool, capital C, isn't just the punch the dude in the face and walk away.
But I think I don't want to pretend that this is easy, because we just went to see the Barbie movie. And we don't need to get into that.
No, no.
Missed
opportunities.
Missed opportunities. We might talk about it at a later date.
Sure.
To be truly, like, non-topical. But there is the big speech from that, which everybody is talking about.
Yep.
And I think, you know, what women have been facing for a long time is when you're pushed into this mode where there are fewer rules and you do kind of have to figure it out yourself.
Yeah.
Like, that is not easy.
No.
That is not always easy. And also, as like culture catches up, you're also constantly, since everybody is sort of looking at this stuff differently, you're also constantly pushing up against other people's expectations. And it can feel like you're torn in a lot of different directions.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it did make me start to understand some of the pushback, because as negative as a lot of those like masculine stereotypes were, and as awful as it was for the people who naturally did not fit into them,
mm-hmm.
For the people who could twist themselves into some of those stereotypes, I feel like they at least had the sense of like they knew where they stood.
Like they knew that it was a decision to try to fit in.
Well, like, and
that they were putting on a suit of armor instead of living their truth, but that was like a concession they made.
Yeah. But you know, like if you could play the game at work, and, you know, like growing up, if you were good at sports and presented, you know, generally in like sort of the stereotypical masculine nature.
Yeah.
Like generally you were going to get a positive response.
Mm-hmm.
And in the long run, I think it is healthier for people to be able to chart their own course. But that is more difficult. Like, there's a reason that people who do it are cool, because it's not easy.
No.
And if we're asking everybody to do that to a greater degree, like that is different than what has come before.
Mm-hmm.
So that made me start to get a better grip on why there is kind of the pushback and fear surrounding this.
Yeah.
But I do feel like women have been doing a version of that game.
Oh, yes.
A lot of women.
Oh, yeah.
For a long time. And gender nonconforming people and, you know, sort of all...
The whole women wearing pants thing.
Yeah.
Having to appear before Congress because she wants to wear pants. Like, that still blows my mind.
Yeah. But so...
Tell me you have a patriarchy without telling me you have a patriarchy.
Yeah. And bringing it back to parenting, one of the most interesting things the article said is that a lot of men don't have father figures in their lives. And I think, you know, for something else we were talking about it, I actually did some research and I didn't bring it up based on the topic I was thinking about. But I was looking at if research had been done about how kids fared with same-sex parents as opposed to having like the traditional mother-father in the home.
Sure.
And the research I read might have been a little bit old. There had actually been no studies done about gay male parents, which I thought was truly strange. But at least looking at families with two women leading the household, there sort of wasn't any difference in outcomes. If anything, they were a little bit more positive. Shockingly. And I was thinking about that because I think, like, to me, the good thing about having two parents in the household is just having two different people.
Yes.
Because, like, nobody has all the skills or all the strengths.
Yep,
it's
100%.
Also more likely in, like, a good relationship that those people are going to have each other's support, which I think, like, helps those parents be their better selves.
Sure.
But this did make me curious about how it fits into this whole sort of, like, crisis of masculinity. Because I wonder, this sort of, like, subtle, you can make yourself what you want, like, this is a complex world. I wonder if it's easier to get a sense of that if you have, like, a real man in the household. Because, like, no guys are just, like, one thing. You know? Like, almost no men perfectly fit into these stereotypes one way or the other. So if you have, like, an actual man in the household growing up, I think it's more likely that you're going to see this, like, dance of being multiple things.
What do you mean by actual man?
Well, as opposed to just, like, interacting with men either as, like, like, cultural figures.
Okay, so
teachers, or like people who, like, you might only see one side of them.
So do you mean then to have a male presenting and a female presenting?
Well, I'm just saying, like,
person in the household,
like young men who identify as men. It might be easier to sort of get a sense of how that experience can be more complex. If you have, like, I just feel like people are different. Like, living with somebody is different than, like, seeing them when they're on the job.
I agree.
So, you know, like, I was reading responses to this article and people were talking about how, like, Barack Obama is a really positive male figure, which I would agree with, right? But, like, I don't know if we know who Barack Obama really is. Like, I feel like if you, like, Michelle probably has, like, a very different sense of him than us who just, like, saw him as president.
Right.
Being president, right? Like, I don't, you know, if you don't have people close to you, you get, like, less of a layered version of them. You know, like, you could be a young man growing up, you only have your mom at home, and you could have, like, a great, you know, like, coach who's super influential in your life.
Right.
But you might just see him on the sports field being his, like, coach self. You might not see him at home, like, putting on makeup with his daughter and dancing around to Taylor Swift.
Right.
Right? So I think it was a one way where I was like, this might be hurting like some of the nuance that could be there. When
it's interesting.
You have these people in your lives in a more intimate way.
No, I agree with that.
So, as always, we have to thank Jonathan Zalbin and First Frame Music for the music for this podcast. And I will say, on the next episode, Reader and Go recorded their own theme song for the podcast. So, I'm not going to play it on this one, but on the next episode, for fun, we will open with their theme song.
Make sure you wear headphones. It's very intense.
Yes.
And so that wraps up this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.
I still have cheese mouth. Okay.
Make sure you keep that in the edit.
Will do.
Mom's has cheese mouth. If she drinks more water than usual, well, cheese mouth.
Cheese mouth.